Ever wanted to get that podcast off the ground? Ever got stuck wondering how to get it done? Well, if you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First off, it's completely free. You heard that right. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will then distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and much, much more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. So as soon as you start recording, get your ads in place, you start making that money. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started today.
It was all the dread love, it's the Brooklyn way.
No man in the sky intervenes.
You can't handle the truth.
An abomination.
You either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain.
Where did that bring you?
Introduce a little anarchy.
This is the Kayatic Dreams Podcast.
Upset the established order and everything becomes...
This is the Kayatic Dreams Podcast. Welcome to the Kayatic Dreams Podcast. This is your host, AJ, and today we're going to talk about The Last of Us 2. Now, there's been a lot of feedback, even before the game even released. There were story leaks all over Reddit, all over the internet, kind of spoiling. I, for one, chose to stay away from the spoilers. I wanted to go into this game with a fresh set of eyes, no preconceived notions about the game that would make me automatically feel the same way as these reviewers, the same way as a lot of these bloggers. So, to recap, The Last of Us, the first one, pretty much is a game that for PlayStation, it's exclusively for PlayStation. Most of you listening to this probably already know, but for those tuning in for the first time and not really familiar with The Last of Us video game, it's pretty much a situation where the world is suffering a pandemic, eerily similar to what we're going through now. And this turns humans into fungal parasite zombie creatures. It's hard to kind of explain. Just picture like Resident Evil, and it's pretty much like that mixed with Uncharted. You know, the exploration and, puzzle solving mixed with action, adventure. So the gist of this is pretty much Ellie, who is a young teenage girl in the first game. She's actually immune to the virus, and they want to bring her across the country because they can provide a cure using her blood, since she's the only known immune person on the planet so far. Her companion Joel is tasked with bringing her, across. So through the story, they get to know each other. They depend on each other. You go through a lot of trials and tribulations, a lot of twists and turns of the game. And this game is brutal. It's brutal as hell. It's not for kids. It's definitely an adult game. It's a linear, story-based, story-driven game. And the story is honestly the heart of it. The action is just as great, but the story is the heart of the situation. And they tell the story in a way that you actually start to feel for these characters. You start to hope for them, and you want to see them survive. You want to see them get through this pandemic. You want to see them, survive the hordes of creatures and the even worse than the creatures at times, the actual humans that are struggling to survive. There's factions out there that are banding together, and long story short, is to best describe, it's like a Walking Dead scenario with a little girl being the main character and the father figure, that she meets up with, and their stories collide, and it becomes their journey becomes one. Now, my reception to the first game was amazing, 10 out of 10. Hands down one of the best games of the PlayStation 3 generation. So much so that they remastered it, brought it to the PS4, and this game has been a gem for a long time now. This game, The Last of Us, the first one, was one of the first video games that I invested my time into and really got fully immersed into the story, to the point that it actually had story elements make me feel emotion towards the video game. And I'm not one that shows emotion too much, so especially towards mediums like video games or comics or entertainment, things that are not human element, based in my life. That was the first time that I ever had emotion, to the point that I turned off the game at a certain point, and I was fucking pissed. I was fuming. I didn't want to see what was gonna happen in the next scene. I called my friend who put me onto the video game. I'm like, you didn't tell me it was gonna go this direction. You're an asshole. I don't even want to put the game back on. He's like, bro, trust me. Turn the game back on. Finish the game. You'll enjoy it. So that's what I did. Got the game. Finished it. It was an absolute masterpiece. Now, by the end of that game, he brings her to the Fireflies, which was a resistance group trying to solve the pandemic issue, as well as continue to push forward the human race and make the world as civilized as possible while dealing with these zombie-like fungal creatures. So when it gets to the point of actually leaving her, he finds out during the story that in order for the cure to be made, she would have to be sacrificed for the world. Basically, she cannot live during the creation of this cure. So Ellie would have given her life to the cause. And by the end of the game, Joel had a change of heart. He was so attached to this little girl that he blasted them away and took her out of there, marched her out of there. That's where we leave off in the first Last of Us. When we pick up the next game, Last of Us 2, my immediate response was, the graphics are amazing. These graphics are probably the best of the PlayStation 4 generation, and that's saying a lot. With games like Grand Theft Auto, with worlds that are very expansive, very detailed, things like the water running, the water in a river, or puddles, or the way the rain drops, the ambience of the environment. You go through the forest, you see rabbits and creatures and birds and all type of things. Everything is alive and functional. The combat system was pretty much along the lines of the first game, but with an improved jump mechanic. That was the biggest difference. I mean, I guess it helped in certain situations. Gameplay is bar none, like, awesome. It's amazing. It didn't feel repetitive. Anytime I came at someone from a different angle, it showed me a different kind of animation depending on location. So if I'm next to a desk and a zombie approaches me and I manage to, attack him, I can bash, the animation might bash his head in for this segment. If I end up going in the same route, another one in the same exact location, maybe, the kill or the takedown will be a completely different animation. So gameplay was amazing. Graphics was amazing. The biggest issue that I see online is the story and the direction that they chose to go with The Last of Us 2. So let's address the elephants in the room. The biggest criticism of this game for a lot of people online is the feminist values. A lot of people complaining that this was a social justice warrior led video game, that it pushed the feminist values on us. It force-fed us the feminist values now, where I can see where people can make that that distinction. They can have that opinion. I can understand that opinion, but I also, while understanding why people may have said it, I also have to disagree. So why would they say it in the first place? Well, my first thing was there were no male figures in the video game that had any importance. The characters that did have importance, they were either killed off, sidelined, or only had maybe a scene or two in the entirety of the game. This was a story about, Ellie growing up, Ellie learning her place in life, dealing with the world she's lived in, how to push forward from that, dealing with her sexuality, and it was based in reality, real things that we go through. Now, we knew Ellie was the main character from the first one, so obviously we're gonna see the video game mostly from her point of view. Now, we get further in that direction because they end up killing off Joel. And this was my only complaint about the video game, was the fact that they killed Joel. And not that they killed him, but they did it early, very early in the game. So it was like the attachment and the things I wanted to know about Joel from the first game and the progress in the 5-year time difference between the games. I wanted to know what's Joel been up to, like how's his relationship evolved. Has he had any interest in this settlement that he's in with women or whatever the case may be. What has he been up to? We get to see him explain the very, very beginning of the game. We get to see him explain to Tommy, his brother, what happened with Ellie, the scientist, and his decision and the reasoning behind keeping Ellie alive and forging forward and, trying to leave the Firefly and the whole situation behind. He ended up taking all of them out. He killed the scientists that would have been able to create the cure. They turned Joel's actions into the basis of this story. But the fact that we didn't have Joel in a meaningful way in the video game, as far as maybe if they would have gave us 2 episodes in this game, because it's episodic. It's, this game is split in it's the intro, then it's 3 days as Ellie, 3 days as another protagonist, then the stories collide, and then it marches towards the finish line, the ending of the game. So that was my only thing that I really was upset at. Like, wow, Joel's gone this early. Okay, with that being said, I did enjoy the story. Going back to the feminist thing, so the only male character that we had to give us to feel any emotion for, they use as the catalyst to drive Ellie's emotions for the rest of the game. So, okay, on top of the fact that now we're in the view of Ellie for the majority of the game, they have her lesbian relationship be a major force in her story, her direction of the game. On top of that, the person that she's now going against, the people who killed Joel, the second part of this game, the protagonist that you play is Abby. And when you flip that side, she's a hulking brute, big Brock Lesnar arms. Her story is pretty much the actions of Joel. When he killed the scientist, that scientist was her father, fueling her for the next 5 years to train, rebuild her body. You see the differences. She's slim, young. 5 years later, she's a hulking brute. She's known for being a massive woman. Super athletic, top-notch, survivalist, everything. So I see where people saying they shoved feminist values. No, I mean, I see the criticism, but they really didn't shove feminist values. You just couldn't understand the fact that the main characters are women. So we're going to get views from their world. If you're a man playing this game, of course you're not going to feel 100% relatable to their situations. But at the end of the day, that doesn't hurt the fact that the story or the gameplay or anything about the game was horrible. Is this game a masterpiece like the first one? I probably wouldn't say it's a 10 out of 10. I definitely give it maybe like a 9. Just because I feel like they could have done more with Joel. He should have been treated with a little bit more respect than he was. With that being said, what they did right in this game was expand on the universe. The other view from Abby, I really enjoyed it. You know, people felt like they took Joel's memory and bastardized it because they technically made him the bad guy. But what people need to realize is, depending on the point of view, everyone is a bad guy. You know, everyone thinks they're the good guy, depending on the point of view. So, it's not that they made Joel the bad guy, it's that you go into this game, if you played the first one, you go into this game with an attachment to Joel. So the motivation when you're playing Ellie, you want to kill Abby. She's that bitch that killed Joel. You want to destroy her. Why would, the game succeeded by giving us that other point of view. Yeah, it would have been, just as cool if we had Ellie marching through the entire game and that's who we were, and maybe they interchanged her partners or whatever the case may be. They could have took it in that direction. But I do like the fact that they give both sides to the story. It's just like a Walking Dead. Depending on the point of view, your character thinks they're correct. You see Abby's motivations. You see why she's a hulking brute. You see her go through hell and back. So by the time these two ladies collide at the end, there's so much weight and so much emotion and so much motivation on both of their parts to attack each other, to kill each other, to take each other out. This is good storytelling. People complaining, this story was horribly done. No, you didn't like the direction they went. Say that. Say that. You couldn't accept the fact they took Joel out so early. Once you get through that and you actually accept the game for the direction that it's going, for one, I really loved the game. Really did. I had 2 moments where I scratched my head and I was like, damn, we went through that for nothing? Pretty much one episode you're trying to save Yara, who's gotten her arm smashed. And I'm like, we went through all this hell and the girl ends up getting killed. Not only killed, but mutilated at the end. Like riddled with bullets after the fact she was already dead. I was like, oh my God, that's bullshit. But by the end of the game, I realized that was the catalyst for Abby and Lev to get an emotional attachment together. Lev was an opposing faction to Abby's. And through their experience trying to save his sister and trying to, survive together, she ends up turning her back on her crew, trying to escape with Lev. So by the end of the game, that bond, it made sense by then. I was like, damn, we went through that for nothing. The second part where I felt that way, and I still drive this through, is when Ellie gets knocked out, destroyed. Abby, there's a part where Abby is about to kill her Ellie's love interest. The only reason she did it is because Ellie tells her she's pregnant. Now, Abby lets her go. I can understand that moment. It's a human moment. It's a great moment. The fact that there's an innocent life in this woman, I'm not gonna take her like, regardless of what I just went through, regardless of my motivation and how much I'd probably be justified for killing you two. That was a human moment, so I appreciated that. when Ellie makes the decision to finally come back and avenge Joel, regardless of what happened between her, Abby, and Dina, when she had Abby dead in the water, she couldn't do it. Leaving Abby out there in the world with Lev, Ellie goes back to her life. That's my second criticism of the game. Reliving it in this moment, that's my second criticism. It was, you could have already drove off to the sunset at this point. You went all the way back, traveled to damn near across the country, from top to bottom of the country, to chase this woman down. You have her dead in the water, and you decide to let her go. Now, if there's no Last of Us 3 going forward, this is complete bullshit, because the motivations were too strong. You risked your life, your livelihood, your family life with Dina. They show her in a better place with a nice house, farm, thriving as a family. But the PTSD of Joel's death and the guilt and anger behind leaving Abby alive drove her to go back. So why leave her alive again? Now, if they make a Last of Us 3 and these ladies eventually cross paths again, honestly, I've invested so much time in Abby as well as Ellie that I'd probably like to see a Last of Us 3 where they're forced in a situation to actually come together, set aside their differences, and try to survive together. I feel like that's the direction Last of Us 2 should have finished off at. If it was an issue of, I can't kill this person, I can't bring myself to end her life and end the situation, then they should have had a resolution that was more beneficial to the time we put in to this game. Now, this game was roughly, my play time was probably about 20-something hours plus, maybe 30 hours plus. It was great. I'm going to replay it again. It was great. There's no reward for difficulty, so you can put it at the lowest setting and still get the same trophies and platinum if that's your thing. So, which is probably a little knock on the game as well. You don't reward people for the difficulty of the game. Maybe down the line they'll patch. Last of Us 1 had a DLC a few months down the line after its release. Maybe we'll get something along those lines for Last of Us 2. But yeah, I felt like if we're not, the way Naughty Dog works, they don't give a guarantee on their next game. They'll leave you wondering while they're building a masterpiece. Naughty Dog is known for their story, their action. This is the pinnacle of what they can achieve. Graphics, 10 out of 10. Gameplay, 10 out of 10. Story, I'd give it a 9. Overall, I'll give it a 9 because some of the story elements kind of brought it down. Those times where I had to stop and they should have went this direction a little bit. But overall, I did enjoy their story. I did appreciate what they attempted to do. And, it's good enough for me to go back and try to play this game again and, absorb the game once more. Was the criticism warranted? I don't think it was warranted. I feel like they shook people's worlds. They thought they were going to have Last of Us Part 1, the same thing copied and pasted in Part 2 with maybe a different story element. They thought they were going to get the Joel experience. That doesn't take away from the action and the fun of the game. It really doesn't. Story-wise, yeah, it hurts that Joel died. And this is, we live in a world where if you do have a female lead protagonist, the male audience is already going to target it and is already going to maybe go in there with skeptical feelings and emotions. Just look at the Birds of Prey movie and that reception. Check that review out. I actually have an episode on Birds of Prey and that whole thing. But men are very critical of women-led movies, video games, whatever it is. They're not used to this shock in the system. Then, hey, maybe I can play a game that's focused on a woman and has to deal with women issues. We even had Lev, who is actually a woman who shaved her head off and went against the values of her community, her tribe, and pretty much is living her life secretly as a boy. Her real name is Lily. So, like I said, I can see why people harp so much on the social justice warrior feeding and the feminist movement. And if you wanted to dwell on those things, then yeah, maybe that's what it was. But no, it didn't hurt the game. To me, I just wanted more Joel. That's really all I wanted. Long story short, 9 out of 10. Go pick up The Last of Us 2. We're in this COVID-19 situation. We have a lot of time on our hands. If you want something amazing, something that's going to take your time and make you want to put in those hours on the PlayStation, pick up Last of Us 2. This has been AJ. This is Kayatic Dreams Podcast. Thank you for listening. Please follow, like, subscribe to the podcast. And also, go check out my Kayfabe Avenue podcast with my Kayfabe Avenue brothers, Mr. Richie Moon and Kayfabe Focus. Check us out. It's all about wrestling, anything in that world. So, once again, this is Kayatic Dreams Podcast. This is your host, AJ. Thank you for listening.